Okay, our next speaker comes from, we'll just keep going, a different industry, the media industry. Kim Bernardo, she was many years as an anchor and producer for ABS-CBN, and then for some reason was convinced to leave and became an elected congresswoman for the Philippine House of Representatives. Stayed there for a ruckus 3 years or so, and then now she's managing editor of Business+Class magazine, and also a prominent business columnist in Manila Times. So please welcome Kim Bernardo to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. Well, good afternoon to the wonderful ladies and the brave and courageous gentlemen that we are seeing here this afternoon. And I say brave and courageous because obviously the numbers here don't lie. We are almost all women. And that's a good thing, isn't it? Yes, that's a good thing. So, I mean, Richard gave me a short introduction. That's because I've known the family, Richard and Rebecca, for quite some time. And I've had worked with them, and we became friends. So that's why he knows me so well that, he said, okay, I'll just introduce you the way I know you. And of course, it is an honor to be standing before a distinguished mix of people here from the business community, from the corporate professionals, and perhaps a few people from government, and the sector where I come from, the media. I mentioned government too because while my career had been mostly with the media, I was also at one point in my life an elected congresswoman. To be honest, I myself did not know it then that this was the life I was going to live. But I have to admit, being both in the politics and with the media can best be described as exciting and frustrating at the same time. So how did I get here? I had summarized them into the 5 tools needed to successfully thrive in politics and media. So earlier Nina had 8 tips, Nina Aguas, so now I have 5 tools. So it gets shorter and shorter because in the afternoon they say it's harder to speak because people are full, and it's probably the best time to take a siesta. So here it goes. Slide number 2. Tool number 1, follow your woman's intuition. I think this is one of the most important things that a woman has. And even in college, I knew then that I wanted to be a journalist and a writer. I was hoping to someday write a book that will become a bestseller, like what J.K. Rowling did to this smashing hit Harry Potter series. But then again, I lacked her out-of-this-world imagination. But I always knew I could write. So I took up AB Literature and told my dad I wanted to become a journalist someday. Coming from a typical middle-class family, my dad said, "Anak, there is no money in media. Why don't, and you will be starving after this." So I said, "What?" And then he said, "Why don't you just become a nurse or an engineer like a good number of your cousins?" Because during that time, I mean, to have a career as professionals, would be a very good thing. And my family, we had a lot of teachers, we had a lot of engineers, and we certainly had a lot of nurses. But as you can see, nurses and being an engineer was really not for me. So I told my dad, I can be a good journalist. As a matter of fact, I can even be a very good broadcast journalist. And being the nurturing father that he is, he said, "But anak, your voice is not good enough." Sabi niya before, "Your boss's EPs." Of course, he was just teasing me. That is that means it was so small that it sounded like the voice of a cockroach. So, and he said, why don't you just stick to writing? So I said, okay, Daddy, if that's what you think, then we'll see about that. So, as it turns out, after I finished college, my first job was a writer at the Business Star. This was the business paper then of the Philippine Star. So I know they have folded it now. They have merged it into one, so it's back to the Philippine Star. 1 year later, there was an opening for a public affairs show on ABS-CBN, and it was called Hoy Gising. I don't know, how many people here remember the Hoy Gising? Do you? Okay, I can still see a lot of hands, thank God. I was very, very young back then, okay, so. Anyway, Hoy Gising was actually the brainchild of ABS-CBN, and the main anchors then were my former bosses, Corina Sanchez and Ted Filon. Many said I was overqualified for the job because the job opening was only for a production assistant. So that means anything and everything. You have to fetch coffee, you have to get the scripts, you have to get Corina's makeup kit, among other things. But I followed my intuition, and I took the job anyway because it was the only opening available. The only other opening for a reporter back then was in TV Patrol, and it had been given to another applicant by the name of Gilbert Remulla. That was my first realization then, that sometimes it is good to have connections, but even better if you have the right last name. Tool number 2, recognize an opportunity when you see one. The intuition and, of course, hard work had proved me right. Barely a year later, my bosses announced they were opening a cable company, and it was called Sky Cable. And consequently, they were putting up a new news and public affairs department. By that time, I wanted to become a news producer, and so I did what was advised by Nina earlier, that you have to go ahead and speak up. I told my boss about it. And he told me, well, go ahead and apply. And a few days later, I got a call in the morning. This was morning. I was doing my work as production assistant. I was already with the news and public affairs of ABS-CBN. And I got a call from Studio 6. That was our news studio. And they said it was my turn to audition in 30 minutes. So I asked myself, why the heck do I need to audition in front of a camera when I was applying to become a producer? So one of the senior reporters back then overheard the conversation, and her name was Ces Drilon. And she said, they're asking you to audition? What are you doing here? Go ahead, borrow one of my blazers and go and run to the makeup room. And so, of course, I ran. When I got to the studio, I had 5 minutes to spare and started reading the scripts aloud. And, well, I was cursing myself. I said, why the hell did I not practice in front of my bathroom mirror? Well, I knew the answer, simply because I did not know it then. And I simply did not, had dreams back then of becoming a news anchor. I wanted to be a producer. I wanted to write, and I knew I was very good at it. But I never thought I was pretty enough to be in front of the camera. So I never practiced in front of the mirror. But guess what? 2 weeks later, I got a call saying that I got accepted, and I was going to start anchoring the weekend news updates on ANC. This is the ABS-CBN news channel. I was shocked, and of course, I was happy at the same time. Let me tell you one little secret here on calming nerves and stage fright, because obviously I did not, I wasn't thinking about it back then of how, to become a news anchor. I wanted to be in the background because I said, being a news producer would be just as powerful because you can control the news, and you can lead the topics that you want, and you can pursue whatever advocacies you can put in between. So on my first weekend as a cable news anchor, my boss, who is now Philippine Star columnist Bu Chanko, noticed how nervous I was. So he stepped out of the studio and he came back with a glass of scotch. He ordered me to drink and drink it in one go. Let me tell you folks, I don't drink. I had never drank anything else back then, and I think probably a cocktail was the biggest thing for me that I drank. So I did. And what happened next? You can say that I ended up becoming one of the most relaxed news anchors for a newbie that whole day. Tool number 3, defy expectations. I know if you're a woman, and this is true not only in the Philippines, but for the rest of the world, we have to try harder. Women always have to try harder in what they do. And, hopefully things will change soon, and the perceptions will change. By now, many of you might be thinking, wow, she's so lucky to have been given those many breaks. In reality, it is much harder for a woman and to show her ability to be recognized than if we were born men. And I had to certainly try much harder to get noticed by my bosses, from answering calls. I did that. I did every single thing. So I answered phone calls in the newsroom. I ordered my boss's lunch, and I also volunteered to write the scripts from some of our senior reporters just so I can hone my craft. So when when I was asked to anchor my first show, it was entitled The Senate at Work. I was totally clueless on the business of legislation, but I knew I had to make this work. So I did my homework and read as many books as I can on legislation and how a bill becomes a law. You can say that was also my crash course, also what you now know as Politics 101. The same thing happened to me when there was an opening in a show also on ANC, and it was called Stock Market Live. Somehow, I managed to become an anchor of that stock market show when I didn't even know at that time how to invest in the stock market. But of course, I just kept that to myself, The bottom line, my dear ladies and the gentlemen who are here, when given a challenge, prepare yourself for it and say, bring it on. In 1998, I was then the business anchor of Stock Market Live on ANC, and it was also an election year. And many in the business community didn't like then the most popular presidential candidate, and he was Joseph Arap Estrada. So we were in the stock market, and we thought of guesting all the presidential candidates then, and we wanted to find out what they thought of the market, what they thought of economy, and what their policies were in case they will win and be elected. And when the stockbrokers found out, they were fuming mad. They said, Kim, what are you doing giving airtime to somebody like him? And I said, well, we could give this to all the presidential candidates. The important thing is that, what if he wins? The important thing is that we know what his plans are for our country. So we did. We asked him to join us in the stock market. On the day of the interview, the exit polls had already stated he will be winning by a landslide. So as I arrived at the Philippine Stock Exchange in Tectite on that day, where I was broadcasting from, I was greeted with a sea of orange. There were orange hats, orange shirts, and orange wristbands, which was the signature accessory of then presidential candidate Arap Estrada. And even when I got inside the trading floor, everybody was in orange, and even those that opposed him. And then I said, okay, so what happened here? So anyway, we went on. I interviewed him. It was my first time to do an interview in the stock market in English and Tagalog. But it went well. So, then, of course, it came to pass that he won as president. Arap was so happy with that interview. And he asked me right there and then, after the interview, if I could be one of his spokespersons for business. And this was, after he becomes president. He was already confident because that was the last day of the campaign, and then next week was going to be elections already. And of course, I laughed. I never thought about it again. But true enough, after about a week or so after he had taken his oath as president, he had me summoned, some of his friends from the stock market. And I said, wow, he remembered. So off we went to see him. And he offered me. He said, the appointment papers are here, and I want you to be my spokesperson for business because that's where I was weak at. And plus, so I don't have to be bothered, answering all these things day in and day out. So, of course, he was joking a little bit, but there's certainly a bit of truth inside that. So, I was so happy. But guess what? Folks, I had to decline. So the stockbroker friends found out, why are you declining that? Are you silly? Are you crazy? And I said, yeah, because on that day, I also found out I was pregnant with my second child. And can you imagine if I were to accept the position of a spokesperson of then President Arap Estrada, and all this time, after several months, my tummy would be growing bigger. Can you imagine what kind of gossip it would have stirred? So that was really hard. I don't think even my husband would agree to that, and I don't think my marriage would have survived. So I guess that was a wise decision on my part. Okay, tool number 4. Take your shot at breaking glass ceilings. Finally, in January 2001, I had given birth to my third and my last child. And he was a boy. I had 2 girls and 1 boy. And I said, I was very happy. That's it. That's my quota. And now I can continue working again. Because every time you get pregnant, you need to take a leave of absence. And if you have a career in the media, especially in the broadcast media, that was very precarious. Because media people, there's only very few slots available. And if you wanted to get in, you had to wait for somebody to be pregnant, to get sick, reassigned, or maybe to resign. So, and that's the brutal reality of it. So that when I got pregnant, I had to give birth. I had to schedule the dates of the delivery. So I would tell my OB, I said, okay, can we do it on a Friday so I can do it on a weekend? And then I would count the days, and I said, can I come back on this day? So that was how hard it was. So that's the difference in the workplace between being a woman and a man. So you've had to deal with that. So like I said, in January 2001, I had just given birth to my third and last child. It was also then that I found out that I was drafted as second nominee to the newly accredited party list group, Citizens Battle Against Corruption, or CBAC party list. This was a very good organization, and this was one that I had been helping with during my free time. I found myself accepting the challenge and campaigned nationwide. And that same year, we won 2 seats and found myself sitting as a congresswoman, as a second nominee in the 12th Congress. The Philippine Congress, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, is dominated by male representatives. And when I came in, there were only around 40 women representatives or 40 congresswomen, including me. And one of the challenges of being a lady representative was that many old school politicians think congresswomen cannot become a speaker of a house. Now, this time, we have more women representatives in the Philippine Congress, but unlike in the US, where they had Nancy Pelosi, for example, we still have to see the day when we will have our own speaker, lady speaker of the House. During my stint in Congress, I was fortunate enough to be one of the authors and saw the passage of several landmark legislation for women, specifically the Anti-Violence Against Women and Children and the Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003. And as an anti-corruption advocate, I also launched the controversial Report a Mistress campaign. Okay, so I knew it was very controversial back then, and I'm sure some people might still remember it, right? Because my logic then was that, apart from the fact that it is still illegal in the Philippines to have more than one wife, unless you're a Muslim, of course, right? It is also, at that time, it was becoming increasingly common for the corrupt public officials to skim public funds in order to support their extracurricular activities, or in this case, extramarital activities. So let's just say that after that campaign of mine in the 12th Congress, I wasn't exactly the most popular congresswoman among my colleagues, but at least I earned their respect. Tool number 5, never lose heart. There were many instances in my career, and it seemed like I had to deal with more failures than success. I wanted to help make a difference in my late mother's hometown in Pangasinan. I ran for 2nd District representative then, and I lost. In 2013, I was asked by the Liberal Party to run again. And despite a formidable lineup from the gubernatorial candidate down to the board members, we still lost again. But why? We were no match. And this, I think everybody knows here in the Philippines. We were no match to the massive vote buying and the PCOS buyout that went on in my province. And although I was disheartened, the desire to help still remained in my heart. Through the years, I became active in several socio-civic organizations and charity groups, and I became president of Club Bulaqueño, where my father came from. This is a charity organization run by fellow Bulaqueños. I am currently president of the Zonta Club of Pasig Foundation, and the Zonta is an international women's organization that helps to, or that seeks to uplift the status of women worldwide. I was a past member of the board of the charity organization Catholic Women's Club, and I am also an active member of the Management Association of the Philippines. However, the one thing that remained constant through those years was my career in media. In 2005, I was asked to help out a business show in PTV4, and then I went to the Manila Times shortly after that. I have a column there. It's called the CEO Corner, and that requires me to feature one CEO every Monday, and I've been doing that since 2006. So you can imagine how many CEOs I have already interviewed since that time. And it was a very good thing too, because with every interview, you learn a little bit of something, and that something is very invaluable. And last year, I was quite fortunate to be offered the managing editor of a new business and lifestyle magazine called Business+Class. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I wonder, what's next for me? Well, folks, only time will tell. But I'd like to borrow a quote from, he's one of those politicians. Some may like him, some don't. But I'd like to borrow a quote from Winston Churchill, where he once said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." Maraming salamat po. Good afternoon.